Good evening and welcome back to 31 Horror Nights. It's October 8th and tonight's movie is Smile. If you've heard of one movie that I'm reviewing this year, it's probably this one because Smile made so much money. This is a horror movie from last year about a therapist or a psychiatrist who, after a traumatizing experience with a patient, starts experiencing these visions or weird phenomena around her. And from what I can tell, it's linked to this supernatural entity that stalks its victims and then kills them. And she's victim number 20. So it's a lot like The Ring or It Follows. This is one of the very few movies I knew was going to be in Horror Nights this year, well before I started actually compiling the list, because I heard about it through word of mouth or other people on the internet. It was sort of like It or Bird Box, one of those horror movies that had people talking about it that normally wouldn't even talk about horror movies. So I'm gonna check it out and see what all the hype is about. This is a little frustrating because somehow Smile ended up being both better and worse than I was expecting. I'm going to give it an 8 out of 10. It was really good. It had the potential to be a lot better. I would describe it as the scariest movie I've seen so far this month, but there were a few points where the scares got over the top. The type of over the top where it's hard for me to discern whether they're actually being intentionally campy or if they're just trying too hard. This film reminded me of a lot of other horror movies I've seen, but the two that rise up to the top are It Follows and The Invisible Man. In format, it's very much like It Follows. The supernatural entity, I think I'm just gonna call it the Smiler. It will stalk and hunt down its prey, and there doesn't really appear to be anything anyone can do to stop it. But it reminded me of The Invisible Man in the fact that that movie really seemed to want to spark a wider conversation about abuse. This movie, I think, I see very strong connections between what's going on here and just the idea of trauma and mental health. Smile to me was at its best when it was fully leaning into that and sort of going into that, and it fumbled when it let the normal horror cliches sort of get in the way of that. Sosie Bacon did a really good job playing the lead Rose. I have nothing to complain about with her performance. I just don't think that the writing did the movie any favors at a few points. Not all of it, but there definitely were a few very cliched scenes I've seen so many times in other horror movies, and it just felt like I was sitting there waiting for the good stuff to start back up again. I really think that Oculus had the right idea of just starting out with, okay, we're fighting this supernatural being, let's talk about it right off the bat, as opposed to the standard scenes of, the Smiler is ruining her life. Oh no, she looks crazy. People think she's crazy. No one's believing her. Obviously, there were some scenes like that in The Invisible Man, but the writing in this movie, especially some of the dialogue, is very on the nose. And considering the fact that Rose started out this movie working at this mental health clinic where they got some really far gone people, she doesn't seem cognizant of the way that to phrase things that doesn't make a person sound crazy. Then again, at other points, some of the dialogue was really good. There were a few decent moments of levity in the movie. Also, quick side note, this has been bugging me for a while, and Smile did it a few times, so I guess it's bad timing, but I'm gonna have to take it on this movie. Why do horror movie directors think it's scary to just randomly include shots that are upside down? It adds nothing. This happened a lot with Skinamarink, it happened a lot with The Innocents, and it happened several times here. What does it add? I think the best part about Smile was how scary it was at points. Again, sometimes it went over the top, but a lot of the scares in this movie really hit. Over the years, I've talked about uh-oh moments in horror movies, moments where all at once the character realizes how screwed they are. There are some really good uh-oh moments in Smile. I just feel like the movie didn't spend its time focusing on the things that it really needed to focus on in order to be truly great. I have to be vague in order to not go into spoilers, so I guess that my final message for this part is that Smile is a scary movie. If you've seen a lot of horror movies like I have, it can feel a little campy at times, or maybe it's just campy to someone who doesn't watch a lot of horror movies, I don't know, but there were also some cliches that got in the way a few times, but overall the concept is really good, and the horror for the most part is done well. If you, like me, have heard a lot about this movie and are curious about what it's like, I'd say check it out. I think it's worth your time. And in order to go into my more in-depth opinion, I'm going to start going to spoilers starting now. One thing that becomes clear pretty early on in the movie is that the curse of the Smiler is transferred from person to person when the victim kills themselves and somebody else witnesses it. And a big part of these deaths is that they're all very traumatizing to look at. Like, Rose watched a young woman slit her throat with a piece of broken cup, and she in turn watched a man bludgeon himself to death with a hammer, and that man watched a woman stab her eyes out. It's spread through trauma. And while the unfortunate witness to see these violent suicides might be random, I don't think it is. Because every single person the Smiler goes after in this movie that we know about, they all have their own trauma of watching somebody die. And that trauma is something that the Smiler uses to mess with them. For Rose, it was the memory of her mother who went into a mental health crisis and killed herself when Rose was like 10, I think, and she's carried that guilt with her, that trauma with her. It created like a divide in her family. It really messed things up. This chain has been going on for a while, and everybody in it killed themselves at the end of it, except for one. There was one man who was able to get out of it alive by violently murdering somebody else in front of a witness and traumatizing them. So the Smiler left him and attached onto that person. Rose does kind of consider trying that, but eventually she decides against it. After there's another fake out hallucination, probably caused by the Smiler, where she does do it. And that was another one of those moments where it got so over the top it felt campy and I couldn't take it that seriously. But then she had an idea that I had earlier in the movie where it was like, well, clearly it needs a witness, so if you kill yourself while you're alone, that could break the cycle. I thought maybe that's how this movie was ultimately going to end. That's before I knew that there was a sequel in production. We'll get to that in a minute. But instead, she seems to want to face the trauma that she experienced at a young age by going back to her old house and facing the, I guess, Smiler in the form of her mother. And I will give them the scene where the mother like transforms and like gets really tall and gangly and starts chasing Rose. That was really well done. However, when she faced her trauma, the way that she worded it, I wasn't thrilled about it. It was, I was scared of you. I'm done feeling guilty about this. I'm going to move forward, which felt like kind of a cop-out to me. And apparently the Smiler agreed, because the whole scene where she actually like kills the Smiler and the house that burns down and she like is able to drive to safety, that was all a fake out in her mind caused by the Smiler. And then it reveals its true form to her by ripping open its face, revealing this bloody, muscly thing that has like 20 different jaws. And then it like unhinges her jaw and like inserts itself into her mouth, and that was the point where I was just like, okay, this is just getting silly. So instead of ending the movie with Rose confronting and facing her own trauma, she just becomes another step in the cycle, because her main ally in this movie, her ex-boyfriend, I guess, Joel, who is a cop, he witnesses her self-immolate, and the cycle will continue because obviously he's traumatized by that. I can't say that this is what happened because I don't know, but it almost feels like they were planning on ending the movie with her facing her trauma in a correct way and having that be the end, but they decided to create this continuation of the cycle because they wanted to make a sequel. I didn't think they needed to not break the cycle in order for there to be a sequel, because they talked about this other chain that was in Brazil. Maybe we can go into detail about that. Maybe we can learn more about how far back this goes, the origin of the Smiler. I don't know. I just think that there could have been a better way to go about the ending. I am cautiously optimistic about the sequel because it does have the same director, and in the past that has worked out really well. A Quiet Place Part 2 and The Conjuring 2 are two of the best movies I've seen for horror nights, so maybe Smile 2 is going to be a lot better. As for the first one, I do think there's a lot of really good things in it. I just don't think it was executed optimally. I wouldn't recommend against watching this movie, but if you, like me, watched this movie and thought it could have been done a little better, I think I would recommend The Invisible Man, because that, I think, takes a similar situation and handles it better. I'm going to keep an eye out for the sequel because I do think it has the potential to really improve upon this idea the same way that The Conjuring or A Quiet Place did. But until then, we're stuck with Smile, which I thought was really good but had some missed potential. Alright, I'll see you tomorrow.